Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please can I ask you to consider subscribing to the channel, and also if you hit that notification bell you'll be informed whenever I post a new video. What you can see on screen is a mock-up of what I had printed and framed just a few days ago. It's quite large, so when it's posted up on the wall it has a fair degree of presence, including the white mat and also the black border or the frame around the edge. It's about 36 inches square. We first met back in the 60s, around the time that this album was released, and we played it to death. Every time we hear a track from this album now, we're immediately transported back to those days when we first met. So I figured this would make quite a nice anniversary gift, but I had to recreate the artwork. Finding the album cover via Google is pretty easy, but I couldn't find one of sufficient high resolution for me to get a print of something like 36 inches square, because I'd like to print it at something like 300 pixels per inch. But I could use the cover that I have here for the colours and also the proportions. Now the cover you can currently see on screen looks quite good when we see it in Photoshop like this, but if I go to image and image size, you'll notice that if I printed this at 300 pixels per inch, we're going to get a print of around about 3 1/3 inches. So we're just going to use this for the colours and the proportions. So I think for the moment I can close this down and we can go to File, New, and create our new canvas. Over on the right hand side I'm going to switch to inches for a moment, and I think I decided to make my artwork at 36 inches because I could always reduce the size a bit, but I knew I wasn't going to print the actual cover any bigger than that. In the end I think I printed it about 25 inches square. So I'll make this 36 and also the height 36, and as you can see the resolution is set to 300. It really doesn't matter what colour we use at the moment, so I'll just leave it at black and create it. Now as you can see by that quick change on the screen, I've also opened up that original album cover, because if I'm going to need to refer to it constantly, I may as well include it with the artwork I'm producing. I can always delete it sometime later. So if I click drag and drop, I can shut this one down. You can now see the difference in the resolution, but I do have all that I need there in the way of colours and shapes. So where do we start with this artwork? Well, there's probably 101 different ways we can do this. This is just mine. If you look up at the tab for this image at the extreme top left, you'll notice that I've already saved this as a Photoshop file, calling it Hard Day's Night, because I suspect as I go through this artwork I'll probably save more than one version. I'm going to hit the Control and Spacebar key to bring up the zoom, and I'm going to zoom in because I want to sample the blue colour, which is the basis of the album. So I can do that from the toolbox on the left. There's the eyedropper tool that I want. I can sample the blue, and if I then go over to the right hand side, select my background, I can flood that. I'll hit Control 0 to fit that back on screen, and then Alt backspace, which will flood my foreground colour. The next problem I would have is making sure I got the proportions of the other colours and certainly the holes in the centre of the frame for the faces. So I decided to select my original album cover and use the free transform tool to increase its size to match my artwork. So Control T will bring up the bounding box. I can drag this up to the top. If I hold the Shift key, I can drag it out and it'll snap to the edge of my artwork to make sure I've got it absolutely perfect. There it is, top, bottom, or left, right and bottom and the top snapped into place. When I hit the little tick there, Photoshop will tidy that up, interpolate my artwork, and all I've got to do now is use the proportions here and gradually build up the album cover at 36 inches square, 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to start by recreating the white line right at the bottom of the artwork, and if you look up at the top of the artwork you can see there's an identical one there. So we only need to create one, then we can just duplicate it to use it at the top, and we get two identical white bars. To do that, I'm going to put the first one onto a new blank layer. Let's create that down at the bottom of the layers. I'm going to label my layers as I go through, I think, because we're going to get quite a number of layers and it may be useful if we can identify them easily. So I'm going to say white line bottom. That'll do. Now I think I'll make a selection of that white line down there. I'm going to pick up my rectangular marquee tool and I'm going to click and drag. I'm not going to worry too much about getting exactly the right thickness, because if I zoom in we can see the selection much more clearly, and we can take into account the fact that in making the original artwork much larger, the lines now have got a very soft edge, so we've got to use a little bit of guesswork here. What I'm going to do though is go to my select menu, because we can transform a selection, and it's so easy to do when we've got it big like this. But I do want to make sure that as I drag down these toggles I don't affect the entire width of this selection. So if I hold my shift key I can drag my selection down to that sort of position and that sort of position, and I think that's probably going to be about right. We can hit the tick on the options bar to commit that change. I'll hit Ctrl 0 to fit the image on screen. Just for a second I'll turn off my original artwork. There's our selection. Looking over to the toolbox on the left you can see white is the background color. Control backspace will always flood our background color, and Alt backspace will always flood the foreground color. I'm going to remove that selection with Ctrl D, and there we have our artwork started. What we could do straight away, seeing as we've got that created, is to duplicate it and recreate the one up at the top. To do that I simply need Ctrl J to make a copy of that, and I'll call this white line top, and we can move it up. Now I can use the move tool and I can just pick it up and drag it up and drop it into position. If I'm not sure of the position I can get close, then I can nudge it upwards using the up arrows on the keyboard until I can't see anything going up and down, and there we have the position pretty well done. Not forgetting though, at this stage I'm going to hit Ctrl S to save over the top of my previously saved Hard Day's Night Photoshop file. Let me turn on my artwork and we'll decide what we're going to do next. Now while we're thinking about creating these white bars top and bottom, let's create the much wider one right at the top, because we can use the one we've just created to do that. If we select that from the layers and hit Ctrl J, we can make a copy. I'll double click and keep my labeling going. I'll just call this top white, and I can use my up arrow to raise it up. Now you can see it moving into place. I just want to put it along the bottom edge. I want to nudge it up until I see it stop moving. So that's about the position. Now I can use the free transform to make that thin white line as thick as the one we wish to copy. So Ctrl T is the shortcut key for free transform. Don't forget to hold the shift key otherwise you'll make the sides get much bigger. Not that it's going to make a lot of difference here, but hold the shift key, drag that up to the top, hit the tick, there's the top bar done. So already we're moving along quite nicely. What we can do next is to create placeholders that are going to contain the images that we'll add a little bit later. Now to do that I need to set a few things up. First of all, I need to turn on my original artwork because I'm going to need to use one of these shapes as a guide. I'm going to use those shortcut keys, Control Spacebar, and we'll just zoom in onto any one of these. George Harrison will do. I also need to create a new blank layer. We can do that from the bottom right of the layers palette. I'm not going to rename this layer for the moment. You'll see why in a moment. I've done a little bit of work off camera so that I can get the curve on the edges or the corners of these shapes just about right, because the curve setting we use is going to vary depending on the resolution we're working in. I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'm going to select the rounded rectangle tool, but from the options at the top of the screen I've already done this little bit of practice, so to speak, and I've decided that 120 pixels gives me a nice radius very similar to what we see here. So all I've got to do now is to click at the top left and drag. Now don't worry if you don't get this perfect first time. All we need to do under those circumstances is to bring up our free transform tool. Control T will do that. Holding the shift key I can drag out the toggle here, maybe a little more, and here, and I can get that shape just about perfect, certainly good enough for what we're doing here. And when I'm happy with that, I can hit the tick on the options bar. What I'll also do, another shortcut key, fit the image on screen, Control 0. What I'm going to do now is move that shape, and I'm going to move it up to the top center. I'm going to do that with the move tool from the toolbox. When I click and pick it up, you'll notice little pink lines appearing all around the place. These are the smart guides. What I want to do, as I drag this around, the smart guides will snap that into the center of the artwork. So I know that that particular shape is perfectly placed for me to start making all the rest of the shapes. Now it may be a good idea if I remove the old album cover for the moment, because we're going to use a little bit of a trick to do this very, very quickly. Right at the top of the stack we've got the one shape that we've just created. If I select my move tool from the toolbar and I hold the Alt key, the cursor changes, but I can click and drag. There's my second shape. Maybe a good idea if I put that over there somewhere for the moment. And you can see the smart guides are helping us. If you don't see these smart guides, you'll find them in the view menu. I can hold the Alt key and do that again, and there I've got the first three on the right hand side. Now I can turn my cover back on and I can get a feel for where they are in relation to the original cover, and they look pretty good to me, because the smart guides make sure that the gap between these is just about right. Now all I need to do is the two on the left hand side, so I can do exactly the same as I did before. I can hold the Alt key, click and drag, and then the same again, and within a few seconds we've got the top row done. Now let's tidy up the layers by merging those together. So there's the one in the middle and all of the others. I'm going to select one and the last one, hold the shift key, select all in between. When I right click I can choose to merge those layers. I merge them, but I don't lose the transparent background that we can see if I turn off the blue. Now we've got one row we can do exactly the same as we did with each individual shape. By holding that Alt key, I can click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. I think I've produced one too many there. Let's get that in the right place. Now let's just turn on the album, make sure everything looks okay. Looks like I'm drifting off just a little bit here. So let's have a look at this one. That's the top one. There's the next one. I'm going to move that up a little bit, and I'll do the same with the next one, which must be that one. Let's select that one and turn it on. Maybe I'll nudge it a little bit with my cursor control keys, and then we should have the last one. I'll do the same there as well, just lift it up a little bit. There, I've got them nicely placed. I think we can move forward with that. I've got a slightly smaller gap there than I have down here, so maybe we could address that if we wanted to. Let's have one more look at the artwork. I don't think it's going to be crucial. So I'm going to select the upper one, select the layer, and I'm just going to nudge it up just a little bit just to increase that gap, but I think that's going to be pretty good. So now I can select the top one and the fourth one, right click, merge those layers. Now we've got all of the shapes sitting there. We can easily make a selection of those and make a hole in the blue background with which we can slide behind any images we choose. It's easy now. So if I go over and select my magic wand tool, I'm going to select each of these. You can see I've got the plus sign just beside the magic wand. That's achieved by clicking the icon up at the top left. That's make a new selection, that's add to a selection, and this is remove from a selection. So all I need to do is quickly click on all those squares. We're only using these white shapes as, I suppose, what you would call a piece of tracing paper, just to be able to make these selections. Because now, if I go back down to my blue background, make sure you remove the layer lock on the right hand side, because now all I've got to do is hit Control X and I can cut out a hole in that background, and the images we want to use can easily be slid in behind there. Now don't forget to save the work you're doing, and if you look up at that tab again at the top left, you can see that the version I'm working on at the moment is Hard Day's Night 3, so I've got at least 2 other versions as well as this. Now perhaps the next thing we can do is to open up each of the portraits in turn and drag and drop them into our artwork. As you can see, I've made a start on that. All of the images need to be black and white like the original cover. I'm going to click drag and drop using the move tool, and I'm going to shut the portrait down because I've now got it in my layered stack. I'm going to need all of these below the blue cover here, so I can click and drag to do that. Then with the move tool I can place this in any square that I want, and then think about resizing it. To do that, we can use that shortcut again, Control T, to bring up the free transform tool. A good tool because it does show us the edge of the image, even though it's hidden underneath the blue on the left hand side. Now I've got limited amount of movement here, because what I don't want to do is end up with anything showing down there or the other side. So I need to avoid something like that. But of course, if I drag up just the cover, and that looks okay, I can move it up and down and get it positioned exactly where I feel it looks best. But once I'm happy with that, and don't forget you can nudge your image into place using the up, down, left and right keys on your keyboard. Once I've done that, I can hit the tick on the center upper part of the screen to commit that free transform. You'll notice though, because of the nature of the aspect ratio of the image, we've got a bit overspilling into the panel below. It may be a good idea to cut these off as you go so you don't miss one and have something encroaching one of the other pictures. So in this instance we could select the rectangular marquee, just click and drag around about there, and I can hit Ctrl X to cut that off. Now I just need to repeat that 19 times, making sure I save my artwork regularly. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, the layers may look just a little bit different because what I've done is I've closed down the artwork I was working on a few moments ago, and I've opened up my original more or less at the same stage we just reached. So a quick recap going down the layers on the right hand side. I don't think I need to keep this layer anymore, and I've got a saved copy anyway, so I could drop that in the bin. I've got my original, so I can still refer to the type of font that I need, but the main thing we've got to create next is the Parlophone trademark on the top left. But as you can see, I've still got my top white, bottom white. I've got two top whites, I've labelled them wrong. That's the large white one, that's the bottom white thin line, that's the thin line, and of course the blue cover. But all of the portraits I've placed within a group. Down at the bottom of the layers you can create what is in effect a folder within the layers palette, and you can put all of the faces within that folder. The good thing about that is, of course, it tidies up the layers quite a lot, and if you did want to just knock them all off for a moment, you can do it with one click of the eye. Now, the techniques that I used to create the logo were exactly the same type of techniques we used to create the basic artwork. So knocking this off just for a minute, let me take you down and show you what I did. As you can see, I created a shape which is about right. I've got the white line applied around the edge just as it was in the original, but I've done that using a stroke here. If we hit the effects down at the bottom, we can put that stroke on and get it to the right thickness. I've used a graduated filter on the top to give me the black top. Drawing a circle is pretty easy. If you pick up your elliptical marquee tool and hold the shift key and click and drag, you'll get a perfect circle. All you've got to do is use that template sitting right at the top of the layers, the one we can't view at the moment, to get the right size. Ctrl D will remove that. I did a search on Google for fonts and pound signs to get one which I felt was correct, and the rest is just finding a font that works and just adjusting the size until we have exactly what we need. Save it in its layered form so you've always got the opportunity to go back and make changes, but when we drop it into the artwork, of course, we would flatten this first and drag it in as a flattened image. So we may as well do that now. So if I go to the top right of my layers and flatten that, drag the tab from the top of the screen, and using the move tool, click, drag and drop. In actual fact, it hasn't turned out too bad in size for this. I thought it was going to be a lot bigger than that. I must have forgotten that I adjusted the size accordingly. Well, just make sure you don't make it too small. You don't want to have to make it bigger. We're going to need this up at the top of the stack, and I think we'll put it right at the top, turn on our original. You can select one of the layers, of course, if you want to, and drop the opacity down if you wanted. But then using the arrow keys on the keyboard, you can see I can nudge this into position, and when I have it in position, I can remove what's underneath. Now, as you can see by the change on screen, I've speeded up the process just a little bit because adding the text is probably the simplest part of the whole thing. Starting with the name at the top, I just chose a font which I felt was as close as it needed to be to the title of the original cover, which was The Beatles, and I used a font called Baskerville Old Face. Now if you can't find a font within the fonts you've currently got on your PC that fits the bill, do a quick search on Google. There's lots of fonts out there. You can download them, drop them into your fonts folder, and they'll be available inside Photoshop. The next one I'm going to turn on is the word mono, and the font for that is called Britannic Bold. Now you can quite easily get the right sizes for these things just by turning on your original artwork and matching the font. But if you double click any of these, then of course you can use the drop down menu here to get a point size. We get some automatic ones, or if you like presets, up to 72, but we can overtype the value in this box to anything we like, so getting the size right isn't a big problem. And then finally the main title of the album, A Hard Day's Night, and of course to get the colour of this we can sample the colour from the original artwork. And for the Hard Day's Night I used Franklin Gothic Heavy. And I think we're just about done. I'm not sure I need my original cover anymore. I'll drop that in the bin. So coming up from the bottom, we've got all of our portraits within a group. We've got the blue cover. We've got the top white thin band, the bottom white band, the top white, I should call that maybe the thicker one, or thick. That's the top white thick variety. There we have the logo. And of course then the text, Hard Day's Night, mono, and the name. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, my artwork has changed again. But what I've done here is prepare this particular piece of artwork as a template, because I think what I may do is to provide it with the download or alongside the download, so anyone who would like to use this for their own family or friends can do so. To do that I've dropped the pictures of my wife into the bin, but of course not before I've safely saved previous versions. But I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file, leaving it in its layered form you can see here, and I'll make that available to those who want it. Whenever we create a piece of artwork like this in Photoshop, there are benefits that we probably don't appreciate at the time. As well as producing something which really has presence when printed and framed on the wall. As I said at the beginning of this video, this, including the frame, is almost 36 inches square, so when it's on the wall it does have that visual appeal, and of course it's in excellent quality because we created it at high quality. But of course to create it we've had to use layers fairly extensively, and what we don't always realize at the time is we're learning a lot about Photoshop's layers and Photoshop in general, and what we learn can often be used in our general day-to-day photography. Don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, to consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. If you come to our website and the Photoshop section, you can download the artwork and the video if you wish. I'll see you next time.